Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 41 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle, and I am here, as I am always, with my good friend, Dr. David Noe. How you doing, Dave?
I am enjoying this beautiful summer weather.
This is perfect, isn't it?
We are expecting highs in the upper 80s, and by Saturday or Sunday, it's going to hit 90.
That's too much for me.
I like it.
Do you like the heat?
I do. I like the heat.
How about the humidity?
Not as crazy about the humidity.
Yeah.
I remember visiting Athens in 2012, and that was an August trip, and the heat rolls up over the ocean. I mean, from the ocean up over the city, right onto the Acropolis.
Yeah, it can get heavy.
It's really heavy, but I don't mind it. I like the sunshine very much.
Gotcha. Well, for me, this is the perfect weather today. I mean, low humidity, clear blue skies, nice little breeze.
You can't beat Michigan in June.
It's very
it's
true.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about Mithras.
Mithras.
The mysteries of Mithras.
All right.
Yeah. Ancient mystery cults. And we're going to get into what we know, what we don't know, and
what we don't want to know.
What we don't want to know, and a lot of kind of mysterious iconography, archaeology, imagery that we're going to do some heavy-duty speculation about.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, but you got our shout-out before we get to that, right?
I do. This one goes to the Reverend Dr. Jeffrey C. Waddington, a friend of mine. Jeff has a real interesting background. He was actually in the Salvation Army at one point, served as a pastor there. Then he came into the Philadelphia area around 1998, and then he's in the denomination that I call home, which is the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. So he's done a lot of teaching, he's done a lot of scholarship, and word has it that he's now pastoring a church in Pennsylvania, and he likes the podcast.
Excellent. That's always good. Right.
Yeah.
So he's a faithful listener.
Yes, he is.
And so thank you, Reverend.
Yes.
For following us.
Yes, for being interested in these important things. And we often say thanks for keeping the flame alive to those who are teaching Latin. Jeff is out there pursuing these kinds of things of eternal value, I would say. And so we're grateful for that.
And I think you also have in the notes he's a student of Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
he's a bit of a jack of all trades.
Excellent.
And shares your name.
Yes, even better. I knew I liked this guy.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
So you got an opening quote for us, don't you, today?
I do. It's nice and short, and it actually comes from someone with a very improbable name, Luther Martin.
Luther Martin.
And he's a scholar of religion. I mean, did this guy's parents want him to go into this or what?
That's not a kind of a switching of first and last name, an opit? Oh, I'm sorry, I mean a typo?
It's not a typo. The guy's last name is Martin, and his parents named him Luther.
Okay, so what did he have to say?
He had to say, well, this is from an article that he wrote called Roman Mithraism and Christianity. He writes, in 1882, Ernst Renan summarized his view for modernity in his widely cited judgment that, quote, if the growth of Christianity had been arrested by some mortal malady, the world would have been Mithraic. And today, we're not going to really get into kind of comparisons between the mysteries of Mithras and Christianity.
Okay.
But I like this quote. It's a famous quote for those working in kind of ancient religion, and it speaks to the popularity of Mithraism.
Also, the concept, if I may, of revisionist history a little bit.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess not revisionist, but alternative history.
Okay.
So
right.
Not so long ago, I was watching this series. I think Philip Dick was the author, Man in the High Castle.
Oh, I watched a bit of that too.
Yeah, it kind of...
I lost interest in it.
Exactly. it promised big, it didn't deliver so much.
Agreed.
But anyway, at any rate, it's looking at what if the Nazis and the Japanese had won the Second World War instead of the Allied powers. So people like to speculate about these kinds of things. It's inherently interesting. We did some of that with the Greco-Persian Wars, right? If not for Thermopylae, people would be reading Persian literature, not Greek literature.
Right.
So what does this Ernst Renan quote mean to you in terms of mortal malady, the world would have been Mithraic?
Well, I don't know what Mr. Renan intended. My sense it's kind of an intentional hyperbole, and that he's just really trying to drive home the fact of kind of how widespread and how popular the mysteries of Mithras were, as Christianity was also kind of growing and spreading throughout the Roman Empire. So it's often, Mithraism is described as a rival to Christianity. So, and I think Renan was coming from the fact that not many people know about this cult, but look how important it was.
So that's the surprise, kind of.
Yes, exactly.
I
right.
see.
No, I think there's an inherent kind of ridiculousness about the quote. We know that from what we know about the mysteries of Mithras, it seems to have been exclusive to men.
Okay.
So
that's a key distinction between Christianity and Mithraism.
Exactly right. So
it's of limited appeal, right?
Yeah.
Only half the gender can participate.
Right. So would the world have become Mithraic? Of course not.
I see.
So, but I don't think that was his point.
Got it.
He was just trying to say, look, this is a really important, widespread thing, and it's key to understanding what the Roman Empire was going through during these centuries.
Right. Now, I know that we don't need to do this for our very educated ad nauseum audience, but if they're unfamiliar with the word Mithras and they want to do a quick Google, it may be helpful if they can spell it. So.
Oh, okay. Yes, Mithras.
Yeah.
It's usually rendered Mithras.
There you go. So what are we giving our listeners today?
Well, we're getting into one of my favorite topics, what's usually called ancient mystery cults. And I'm hoping this is the first of a few episodes we can do along these lines, because it's such a fascinating, intriguing topic. So we're going to swim into some of these murky waters of these, what were secret initiatory cults, which really sought in some kind of transcendent way to bind the worshiper and the deity together in a mysterious, intimate kind of way that you don't really see in the more public expressions of religion in the Greco-Roman era.
We might say that those were state religions.
Yes.
Right? The public worship and the fortunes of the state were closely tied together, and these are private.
These are private cults, right?
Yes.
And they also deal with the problem of death and the seeming meaninglessness, emptiness of death, which, as I understand it, the public cults weren't interested in at all.
No. So this goes to Odyssey Book 11, right? A Pain in the Nequia.
Yes, right.
Parts 1 and 2.
1 and 2, right.
So Book 11 of the Odyssey, it's bleak, it's hopeless. We likened it to the Department of Motor Vehicles, waiting in line.
Exactly.
But these cults, what's the expression that you were using? These cults,
they flipped the script.
Flipped the script.
Yes.
Right. So tell us more about that.
So, and painting with a broad brush, the whole subject of the public religion is a really fascinating, complex topic. But I think there is an element that the public cults, their job was to appease these very unpredictable deities, to keep, the Romans spoke of the pax deorum, the peace of the gods, keep them happy. If anything, one of the things we take away from Homer is that the gods they're unpredictable.
Yeah, they're ornery.
Ornery and not all that interested in humanity, and when they are, it's for their own ends. And so, if that's your theological world, you really want to kind of keep these angry deities sated, happy, maybe even looking the other way.
Yes, I like to quote, if I may, from our teacher, right? The wonderful Richard Weavers.
Yeah.
He used to tell me, Zeus is a big brute that refuses to die.
I never heard that.
He didn't say that?
Yeah, he might have, but I don't remember.
Only
That's great.
if you were an initiate would he share that secret knowledge with you.
Oh, so you had the in.
No, I did not. But he would he'd say, Dr. Weavers, what's the difference between Christianity and the pagan gods? It's very simple. Zeus is a big brute that refuses to die. That's it. There's no morality, no specialness about them. They are immortal. That defines them.
Right. Yeah, and I think we've spoken on the podcast before about how there's even an element of ridiculousness to that. Their immortality makes them kind of pointless. Right. What is the meaning of their existence?
But you have to fear them and placate them because they're real.
Exactly.
And they'll harm you if you don't.
Yeah. Right. So you have to deal with them. You have to keep them happy, or distract them.
It's the way I feel about the IRS, to be frank. I don't really believe in them and their purposes necessarily.
But you have to deal with them.
But they're always going to be there, and you have to placate them, right?
Right.
I believe it was, I don't want to get too far afield, but I believe it's Ned Flanders who always drops 2 breath mints into his tax return.
Does he really?
Yeah, before he seals it and sends it off to the IRS.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to get on anybody's bad side.
That's right. Smart. That's smart. So if you believe, as I do, that part of the human experience, or the part of the need of every human being, is some sort of spiritual need. There's a spiritual component to every human life. Then those public cults would be deeply unsatisfying.
Of course.
They do nothing for that side of the human experience. And so I think that the mystery cults kind of filled that vacuum.
Absolutely. They gave meaning to everyday existence, and a meaning that was separate from public life.
Right.
To quote Extreme, one of my favorite bands, right? There's a hole in my heart that can only be filled by you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, great acoustic-driven number.
Yes, very good.
Yes.
Nuno Betancourt. So as we get into it, Jeff,
yes.
Where are we starting in this journey?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit more broadly about what we mean by mystery cults, in case for our listeners aren't familiar with the concept, before we get to the details about Mithras itself. And so we've talked about how there's this move from the public to the private, from the group to the individual, from some sort of kind of crowd experience at best to some kind of individual transcendent experience. Those seem to be hallmarks of all the mystery cults that we know something about. Now, as we'll also quickly see, these things are called mystery cults for good reasons. There's the secrecy that surrounded them was part of their power. And we know that for some of them, to divulge these secrets meant to incur serious penalties. In some cases, even you were liable to the death penalty.
Really?
If you divulge ththese things. And so the ancients kept these secrets extremely well, to the degree that we're not going to find some, because it could happen, we're not going to find some buried scroll that reveals the secrets of what went on in the secret chamber. Mm-hmm. We're left to kind of these very intriguing speculations. But that deep secrecy was something that lent it an allure. Whereas with the public cult, the priests are on the Acropolis, they're making the sacrifice on behalf of the populace. There's no real mystery about what's going on.
Yeah,
there.
we've seen this all before.
We've seen it all before, and it's the prelude to maybe, the rare times where the Paulus could eat some meat, mm-hmm. right? But there was no spiritual individual connection, and the mystery cults offered that.
And maybe they would have waffle cones too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Elephant ears and things like that.
Exactly. People would come running for that stuff.
But for the most part, it's humdrum. We've seen this all before. Now, the word cult, I would like to give a little bit of an etymological distinction here.
That'd be helpful. Please
if I may. So the word cult often has connotations of something dark and wrong, but the word's origin is from colo-colere, the Latin verb that means to worship. So the Romans could agros colere, care for their fields, and they could deos colere, care for their gods. So there is such a thing as Christian cult. There's Christian worship. There's Jewish cult. There's Islamic cult, etc. So not to be confused with occult, which means hidden and dark.
Right, exactly. I know when I use this word in class too, one of the things that students often think of first are like Charles Manson.
Oh, right, or David Koresh.
Exactly, the Branch Davidians.
You're in a cult. Yeah. So it has connotations of something evil and concealed. And I think that the mystery religions, you'll have to enlighten us, they played on some of those ideas mm-hmm. for their allure. But in its basic meaning, it just means worship.
Worship, exactly right. Yes. Very good. One of the things that also kind of ties all of the mystery religions together, again, such as we know about them, is the center of the myth or the narrative has something to do with death and resurrection.
Okay.
The god or the goddess undergoes some sort of, usually kind of metaphorical death and resurrection. They go to the land of death. They return from the land of death. They're like in the case of Dionysus, he's dismembered and reborn. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about the dying and resurrecting god. The mystery is, as the initiate is tied to that. They become part of the secret. They ride the coattails of that deity through death, past death, to some kind of life.
So by being associated with the individual who succeeds in this way,
yes,
they receive the benefits.
Right. Now, the most famous example of that, and I'm guessing that maybe our audience might be most familiar with, is the story of Persephone.
Right.
So Persephone is kidnapped by Hades,
who is her uncle.
Right. Exactly. There's all this weird family stuff going on.
Yeah.
Right?
The earth opens up. There's a giant yawning chasm. He comes up out of it in a chariot or maybe a Prius. I can't remember. Grabs her, and then she's spirited off to the underworld, and the ground closes over the top.
Yeah.
To me, it is the most frightening story in all of antiquity.
It is. Yeah, it's one of my favorites, and for those reasons. And now I cannot see Hades not driving a Prius now.
Well, I think that when Bernini sculpted this, there's this wonderful in the Borghese Galleria.
Incredible.
Of the rape of Persephone. I think originally they were going to be seated in a Prius.
In a Prius? That was the original plan? That got scrapped?
Yeah, the patron said, no, we can't do that.
He had a stock portfolio in the oil industry, right?
That's
so
right.
We're not going
no electric cars.
Right. So Persephone, again, this is worthy of another episode. Long story short, a deal has to be made with her mother, Demeter,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Demeter, the goddess of grain.
Because she has refused to allow things to grow.
Right. So she's the goddess of agriculture, and when she gets upset, things don't grow, right? No crops. And so ultimately there's a compromise that has to be struck, that Persephone will spend part of the year as the bride of death, as the queen of the dead, and part of the year as the daughter of the grain goddess. And that cyclical pattern explains the seasons. And so when she descends to go down to Hades, her mother mourns, the earth withers and dies, we get fall, we get winter.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which
then,
in the state of Michigan is about how many months?
Oh, it's about 13.
11 and a half.
Right. There's a whole lot of Persephone descending around here.
Yes.
But when she returns, her mom rejoices, and we get spring, we get summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the mystery. And so I think I like to impress upon my students is that, if you live in a place where you have a very distinct change of seasons, you feel this viscerally,
Mm-hmm.
right? And being Michiganders ourselves, when that spring finally comes and the last of the snow melts, there's something kind of inherently
It's incredible.
joyous about that,
Yes.
right?
I've been waiting for my roses to open in my yard, and they finally did, and you got to mark the occasion.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, these arose in Greece, which is, it's not tropical, it's temperate.
Right.
The seasons aren't as marked as at our latitude, but you still can perceive them.
Yeah, that's more kind of maybe rainy and chilly in the wintertime. So less of a dramatic change, but enough that I think that, the metaphor
It
holds
holds
true, right?
for sure. And this is referred to as the vegetation cycle?
Yeah, vegetation cycle, the cycle of the seasons. And a lot of these, that kind of death and resurrection motif is often expressed in the blooming of flowers. You even see it in stories like the story of Aphrodite and Adonis, where Adonis is killed and Aphrodite mourns the loss of her lover, but she changes his blood into a flower that blooms every spring. And so Adonis lives on in this kind of way. It's a very common thing you see in lots of not just Greek myths, but in lots of myths around the world. Yeah. So the mystery cults tap into that kind of death and resurrection cycle. And so how does this work? We're not really meant to understand. That's part of the mystery. By going through the ritual.
Well, hold on now. What do you mean by how does it work?
So Persephone can go to death and return. Well, that's great for her. What does it do for me? And so I think this is where the mysteries, and this would be called the mysteries of Eleusis, which were the mysteries surrounding the Persephone story. The initiate somehow mysteriously, some kind of ecstatic, kind of unexplainable kind of fashion, are tied to that goddess, and you go through death with her. Now, again, how does that work? The point is you can't practically spell it out. Well, this is exactly what's happening. There's a kind of ecstatic, irrational element to the mysteries. That's just simply part of the package. That's how I see it.
I see.
Right.
So there are several of these different mystery cults. We're only talking about the mysteries of Mithras today, but
Yep.
the Eleusinian ones that you mentioned, I think you also have mentioned already the mysteries of Dionysus,
Yes.
the Eastern god who comes west at some point from the region of Phrygia, his dismemberment, and then there are a couple, at least one Egyptian mystery cult.
Right. So the Isis was a popular mystery cult, and here too. I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels with the Isis mystery cult and Mithras in that Isis was a goddess kind of imported from the Egyptians, but by the time she becomes a mystery deity, she's become thoroughly Romanized. And it's that's another thing you see with these mystery cults is that there's often kind of a whiff of the exotic about them, right? It's not the homegrown cult. There's something Eastern or Egyptian. I think we've talked about how for both the Romans and the Greeks, Egypt was a land of tremendous deep mystery, right?
Well, that would be because of its antiquity foremost, I think.
Right, and just so much of what the Greeks and Romans saw there, they just simply did not understand. They couldn't read the hieroglyphs.
No.
Right? And these massive pyramids, what could it all mean? Right, and so there still is something about Egypt to this day that's kind of, you watch a Discovery episode on Egypt, and the music is always because
it was aliens
that built the pyramids, right?
They did all of that.
That's been settled, right? Yeah, right. So that was often an aspect of these mystery cults too. It was something exotic. It was something from beyond their borders, and that I think also kind of lent it some allure.
Okay, and what about the mysteries of Orpheus?
Orpheus too. Orpheus, famous for being the great musician, the great lyre shredder, right, of Greek mythology.
Lyre shredder?
Shredding like guitars. I'm borrowing this from you. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about.
Lyre shredder? His amp went to 11.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. So he's a son of Apollo, the god of music. But he too has this strange story where he's descended upon by a group actually of worshippers of Dionysus. Maenads, and they tear him apart.
Limb from limb.
But his head goes on singing.
As it floats down the river.
Right. And so he goes on. It's a weird, strange, bloody story, but he also transcends death. His song transcends death.
Yeah, to quote Celine Dion, his head will go on and on.
Is that what she was talking about?
Absolutely. So we've got at least those four: Eleusinian, Dionysian, the mysteries of Isis, Orpheus.
Orpheus. There's the Samothracian mysteries, which we know very little about.
Now, did the ancients take these things seriously, or was it all one-liners and wisecracks like you and me?
It was very serious.
Okay,
deeply serious, and long-lasting. So the Eleusinian mysteries of Persephone lasted probably almost unbroken 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And the festival itself lasted for a couple weeks.
A week, late September, early October.
And they would march, right, from Eleusis?
From Athens to Eleusis. And back at the end. Yeah. And it kind of roughly coinciding with the beginning of fall. And so again, as Persephone's descending, you kind of follow her in that.
Right. And we got to devote a whole episode to the Eleusinian mysteries.
At least one.
At some point. Because one interesting side note is that there is an author who believes that the word Eleusis, from the Greek erkomai and then eleusomai, is a Christ prophecy.
Oh, really?
The one who is to come, eleusomai.
Interesting.
I don't know if there is any credibility to that whatsoever, but it's a developed thesis.
We might have to revisit that. I think we could also. I would love to talk about on the podcast is, how does Christianity, the mythos of Christianity, fit into this? Right. And that's one thing that I'm sure our listeners are already kind of hearing.
Of course.
The story of Christianity is also centered around a dying and resurrected God.
Yes, right? And the attendant benefits that come from being associated with a person who succeeds in doing that.
Right, and even a guy like Paul often uses the word mysterium.
Ta mysterion.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have time for that today, right? So, but yeah, the ancients took these things very seriously. Like we were saying, they kept the secrets very well to the point where our knowledge only goes so far. There's a wonderful, I don't know if it's wonderful, but there's a famous anecdote from the late 5th century BC. Alcibiades, right. So this young buck, superstar, general, friend of Socrates, was positioned to be one of the leaders of the Sicilian expedition during the Peloponnesian War.
So he's aristocratic blue blood.
Yes.
Maybe the most talented individual of his generation.
Right, exactly. And right before this expedition is set to go, he is accused of, and very likely guilty of, doing a drunken parody of the mysteries of Eleusis and revealing some of these deep secrets in a symposium. And the word gets, and there's more to the story than that, but the word gets out, and ultimately he's recalled to stand trial under the penalty of death, which the ancient Athenians used very sparingly. They weren't executing people left and right.
Threatened a lot,
but in Alcibiades, instead of ultimately facing it, jumped ship and more or less never returns to Athens again. And so that's how serious it was. They were willing to kind of cut one of their leaders, one of the most talented guys, because he profaned these mysteries.
And this was 415?
Yes, exactly.
Right around the time of the Sicilian expedition, the Peloponnesian War?
Right, exactly.
So we've established that the ancients took these rites very seriously.
Yes.
That example of Alcibiades. Was it an exclusive kind of experience?
No.
These mystery cults, were they exclusive?
No, they weren't. I mean, some of them would have different levels. We know that at Eleusis that you could come back the next year, and you could undergo kind of a further, what they called an epopteia, further looking upon.
Did you have a membership card or a punch? You'd get a certain number of punches, and then you got a free.
There was a free initiation and frappuccino. I don't know how that worked, how they kept membership. That's a great question. But no, you weren't then bound to Persephone for the rest of your life. This is my goddess. It was perfectly woven into the fabric of their polytheism. And
this is what's shocking, I think, to
Yes.
people who live in a, I don't know, post-Christian world, we could say, the non-exclusive nature of these various theological commitments.
Right.
Today, I think, maybe it's changing, it's a little more stark. You're a theist or you're not.
Yes.
You're a Christian or you are another religion, but you can't really be two at the same time.
couldn't be a Christian Hindu.
No.
Right. Exactly.
To my knowledge, that's not a common formulation. Now, that may be people's attitudes, but it's not ever articulated that way.
No, it would be nothing that you would consider to be orthodox
Mm-hmm.
in any sense. Right. We know there's a few examples we know that this guy Aelius Aristides from the late Roman Empire, from his writings, he kind of collected these things. So anxious he was about the disposition of his soul that he was initiated into many of these cults. And
So he had lots of frappuccinos.
lots of frappuccinos, right? That'll amp you up.
Absolutely.
Right. So
And Plato was an initiate also into the
was.
mysteries.
He was, and I mean, he doesn't write much about it, but Plato, kind of the cranky stick in the mud that he often was.
Oh, that isn't nice.
Well, but he didn't seem to have a lot of respect for traditional Greek cult.
He certainly did.
Well, I mean,
Okay, let's look at it just like this for a moment.
Okay.
His major dialogues end with theological fables, right? The Republic, the Gorgias. So you're right. He's taking down Homer. We've talked about that before.
that's what I mean.
He's taking down Homer. He doesn't like the Homeric ethic, but he's a monotheist of some sort. And has a strong religious feeling.
No, yeah, I guess I wasn't saying he was.
You gonna walk it back now, Winkle?
I'm trying to explain it for you who didn't understand me the first time.
Okay.
He was a theist. I think he had a use for religion, but not the polytheistic Homeric religion. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
Fair enough.
Right.
That's the euthyphro, right?
Yes.
The gods can't be at each other's throats if they're really going to be divine.
Exactly right. And I agree. But he, too, is said to have gone through the mysteries and found them to be kind of a deeply moving, meaningful, purposeful experience. So even a guy like Plato could find kind of value in these things.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about the exotic, ecstatic, irrational nature of some of these? We've touched on it. We can maybe just sum it up before we move on to Mithras.
Yeah, I would just add that from the trickle of information that we have from people that went through these kinds of things, there was kind of this notion of ecstasy or ecstatic experience comes from this. And I mean, slightly different than what we usually, if you're ecstatic about something, it just means you're really excited or happy.
Right.
But the word literally means to kind of stand outside yourself.
Exactly. Let's
right?
go to the etymology, right? Ekhistemi, to place yourself outside of something.
Right. So some kind of out-of-body experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the ways that these mysteries could be, in some ways, easily kept is the notion that even if someone, buddy, said, "Hey, I heard you went through these mysteries. Tell me what went on." There's this notion, well, even if I wanted to, I couldn't. It was so ecstatic. It was so beyond myself that it was beyond description.
It's ineffable.
Ineffable.
I have
Exactly.
I have no analogies. I find some of those stories where people say that they died and then they saw themselves laying on the table. Some of them seem like obvious frauds, but others seem really, frankly, quite plausible. Specifically those that are well documented and where they mention things that were heard in the room, that other persons didn't have access to.
Right.
I find them fairly plausible.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and you pile up enough of these that kind of lends kind of a broad believability, at least to that experience, right? So yeah, something along these lines, I mean, that language of death and resurrection, were these mysteries meant to be kind of a near death experience, right?
Yes, I think is the answer, isn't it?
I think so. It's at the center of so many myths. It's the catabasis. You're kind of enacting a catabasis. You're facing death in some kind of mysterious, visceral, terrifying kind of way, and then you get beyond it, and with the resulting ecstasy and maybe the more modern sense of that word, kind of a joyful expression.
Yes, like when you get off the roller coaster.
Yes.
You've cheated death.
Exactly right.
Did you like roller coasters?
I did. I can't do them anymore because due to my age, I get motion sickness.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I love them.
I love them too, but if I dope myself up on like Dramamine too, I'm too sleepy to even enjoy it now.
I see.
So it's a tragedy. I'm really sorry you brought that up.
Oh, I'm sorry too.
I like.
Should we pause for a moment of silence?
No, we're good. I'm past
Your
it.
enjoyment of roller coasters is finished.
It is. Right. It's been years since I've been on one. But the roller coaster as a catabasis, I think that's great. Right. It's a safe way to face death.
You go up this hill, there's anticipation, you're pausing, suspense, then you plunge at a breakneck speed,
Yes.
right, down to the valley, and are you going to come out of it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's a death and resurrection. I often will use kind of the example of a horror movie being the same kind of thing, right? You go deliberately into this dark room with a big screen with the purpose of terrifying yourself. And it's a safe way to kind of face death. And when the lights come out and you go out and refill your popcorn bucket,
I always refill.
you got to. That's part of the resurrection.
Definitely. So now we need to get on to the bull.
We
right?
do.
Mithras and the bull, but we're going to do that after the break. This week's episode, listener, is brought to you by Ad Astra Coffee. Located down in Hillsdale, Michigan, Patrick Whalen and his crew are roasting some delicious coffee. Jeff, what do you think about Ad Astra?
I had some this morning. Actually, the last of my Huehuetenango.
You did?
I did. It always goes way too fast.
What kind of notes do you detect?
I'm not the best one to talk about this, but it was a kind of a sweeter, a lighter note.
I would say earthy, too.
Earthy, yeah.
But not soil in the cup.
No soil in the cup. No. It was great. My wife loved it. I'm really going to miss that blend now that it's gone.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
So the fine people at Ad Astra have been roasting beans for years, and I understand they only use beans that rank 80% or higher
Right.
on the coffee scale.
Yep.
Now, we're both pretty hard graders, aren't we?
We are. Yeah.
So, and 80%, that's doing pretty well.
That is very well. Yeah, very
Right.
good. Yeah. I learned they roast on a 3-kilogram Mill City roaster. And actually looked up a picture of this thing. It looks like H.G. Wells' Time Machine.
Incredible.
It's incredible. Yep. And they have their poetry series where they put some nice lines of poetry that you can read as you brew your coffee and as you drink your coffee. I actually found this line from Rilke.
Let's hear it.
Which really fits for our episode today. I want to be with those who know secret things, or else alone. The only journey is the one within. The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens.
Oh, that's incredible.
That's deep stuff to read.
I'm a little lost.
with your morning cup. Yeah.
Would you say that the folks at Ad Astra have a goal?
They do have a goal. It's to create extraordinary quality in the cup, value for their producers and customers and strong local communities.
All right. That sounds great. So how can the Ad Nauseam listeners score some of this delicious coffee?
All they got to do is go to adastraroasters.com, ADASTRA roasters.com, check out what they have to offer, enter the coupon code ANAA, and get 10% off their order.
Now, Jeff, we're also sponsored by Ratio Coffee, aren't we?
We are. Yes. Ratio Coffee, based in Portland, Oregon. Mark Helwig and his intrepid team out there bringing just the best of the best in home brewed coffee.
So these coffee makers are not only effective at delivering high-quality brew right into the cup, and not only is the coffee delicious, but the machines are gorgeous.
Yeah, they're works of art. I have the Ratio 6. You've got the Ratio 8. They're just sleek, good-looking machines.
Yes, I have the 8, and the other day I had some friends over, and these friends were actually from Oregon, and I offered to make them some coffee, and immediately their eyes just zeroed right in on the Ratio 8, and they said, "That's a beautiful modern aesthetic." Yeah, exactly. And then I brewed up some delicious Ad Astra beans for them.
Yes.
They loved it.
These Oregon friends, they know their coffee.
They do.
Yeah.
In fact, the woman said, I don't remember her name, but she said, I'm going to buy 2 of these.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Let me give you the coupon code.
She wanted one in a backup?
She wanted one for herself and one as a gift. A common thing, actually, because once you see these machines, it's really hard to resist.
Yeah.
So it's an automatic pour-over, sends this hot water down through the veins into the cone. And how do you describe the carafe?
It's a stainless steel, sleek, gleaming container for the coffee. Keeps it warm without that kind of stupid burner that you see in so many
the
coffee
scorched
machines.
pad
Yep.
down underneath, which adds the brackish tang.
Exactly, which you do not want.
No.
Right.
All right, so Java files. Jeff's going to tell you how you can score your own Ratio 6.
Yes, I will. Just go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO coffee.com right now, and you can get a 15% exclusive discount on the Ratio 6. So go to the website, enter the special code ANCO, get 15% off. Check it out today.
ANCO, check it out.
Today's episode also brought to you by Hackett Publishing, based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cambridge, Massachusetts for over 40 years, bringing attractive, affordable, accessible translations to the academic and lay reader alike, covering the entire sweep of the Greco-Roman era and also many other academic disciplines. Dave, what do you like about Hackett Publishing?
Well, one of the main things I like is that they generously stepped up right near the beginning of this podcast and said, yeah, we want to sponsor you.
They did. They came in really early.
They
didn't
did.
They? Yeah.
They said, we want a piece of that. We want to be a part of that. We support the classics, and we're going to give your listeners a 20% discount on their order plus free shipping.
That's huge.
Yeah, and they said we're going to offer them beautiful editions with gorgeous covers, up-to-date translations, nothing too stuffy, too musty.
Right.
We're going to offer them Stanley Lombardo's great translation of the Odyssey, the forthcoming Len Krizak on Virgil's Aeneid, the Aristotle collection. These are really fine works that these folks have put together.
Indeed. So listeners, right now you can save 20% on any order. And as Dave just said, free shipping on anything you get from Hackett Publishing. All you have to do is go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com, find the text you want, enter the code AN2021 in the box.
What was the code again?
It was AN2021 in the box. Check it out today.
Okay, Jeff, so as we get back into it now, tell us about Mithras.
So Mithras, the mysteries of Mithras, were particularly popular throughout the Roman Empire, roughly between the 1st and 4th centuries AD. So about 3 to possibly 400 years, it was even more so than Eleusis in Greece, the most popular of these mystery cults, at least what kind of archaeological remains seems to suggest. One of the ways that we determine this popularity is we find these chambers, which were called Mithraea or Mithraeum, in which the mysteries of Mithras were celebrated. We found them all over the landscape of the Mediterranean.
So the Mithraeum is the singular, right? It's one of these chambers,
right,
where the cult of Mithras is celebrated, and the plural is the Mithraea and the Mithraea, and you say they're scattered all over Europe.
Yes, exactly. We find them in Italy, Greece, England, France, Spain, Germany, Turkey, Tunisia. Hundreds of these things have been found. And that's also an important distinction, say, from a place like Eleusis, where if you wanted to be initiated into that cult, you had to go to Eleusis at the certain time of year. There was a central sanctuary.
But this was franchised.
This was franchised, right, exactly. It was a portable cult, and all you needed was a group of guys, enough funds to build one of these underground chambers, and you were in business. It probably was more complicated than that, but
right.
Yeah, you get the point.
Licensing rights, right, and so forth.
Yeah.
So Franz Cumont.
Yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, Cumont.
Cumont,
Yeah.
Frenchman.
Yes.
What does he tell us about Mithraism?
He wrote, for more than 100 years, was considered kind of the book on Mithras. And it's only in the last 10 years where religious scholars have started to take another look and started to kind of take down some of his arguments. But for a long time, Cumont's thesis about Mithras was this was a kind of a hero cult. Mithras was some sort of Hercules-type figure in Persian mythology that was imported from the East, brought back to the Roman Empire. His theory was that you had Roman soldiers kind of stationed in the eastern edges of the Roman Empire came into contact with that and spread it organically, much like...
After they brought it back, you're saying.
They brought
it back from the edges of the Roman Empire as they bumped into the Parthians, places like Persia and Parthia. So this would have been under Trajan, right?
Yeah.
117, I think, 98 to 117. Trajan, the Roman Empire was at its greatest extent.
Yes.
East all the way to the Euphrates.
Right. Arguably it's most secure as well, right? And most peaceful.
Right. So then these soldiers, they come back west, and they've picked up some local culture, you might say.
Sure.
Including the religion. Is there any indication or proof that they were intermarrying there on the borders? I mean, officially Roman soldiers weren't married.
Right.
But they always had a common law wife, you might say, and children on the frontier, even if they had a wife back in Rome.
Yeah.
Did they bring back some folks with them? And was this part of the origin of the popularity of the cult?
I don't know. It's a really good question, and I don't know what the clear answer to that as well. I mean, certainly this is how Christianity also spread kind of organically, beyond the missionary journeys of Paul and Peter. Certainly you had the soldier class coming into contact in Palestine and converting.
Right.
Could a similar thing have happened with Mithras? It's possible. In recent years, this has been challenged in that we don't have any evidence that Mithras was a kind of a hero in existence.
No evidence for that.
Right. Now that doesn't mean there it wasn't.
But it does give an opening for or an opportunity for scholars to see what's not there.
Exactly right, which I'm more or less in favor of.
Okay.
But kind of the new theory is that probably not, that the cult of Mithras is almost thoroughly Roman.
Okay.
But its imagery and its characters in the art and iconography and whatever narrative there might have been had kind of a Persian sheen to it to give it kind of that exotic flair. Mm-hmm. Right. So
everybody likes a Persian sheen.
Exactly. So what its real connection to anything actually Persian, we don't really know.
Can't say.
But I would say the better corollary is something like Isis. Maybe something borrowed from another culture, but 98% thoroughly Romanized by the time it becomes kind of a functioning cult.
Okay.
Right.
So what about the popularity of Mithraism with the soldier class?
Well, that was one of the things that Kumant kind of built his theory on, is that from what we can tell is that people going down into these underground chambers and members of this guilds tended to be this kind of soldier, kind of middle class in Roman societies, who come on and said, well, that makes sense because it was probably brought back by that class from the East where they encountered it. But again, as the more I read about this, speculations about who was actually involved are really just that, speculations. There's not a lot of evidence.
So we need some hard evidence.
We need some hard evidence.
We need some sacred texts or something to be discovered somewhere in one of these multiple Mithraea, which give us a kind of handbook to how to worship Mithras.
Right.
That would tell us what's going on.
Right. And I think that the hopes for that are dim.
Could we put Harrison Ford on that?
Oh man, he's getting a little long in the tooth.
Nicolas Cage?
Please, not him.
You know, he went through his own series of treasury movies.
Oh, he did the National Treasure.
I don't remember the names or the plots. They're pretty much interchangeable. But
there's something written on the back of like the Declaration of Independence.
I think so, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't Mithraism.
It was not Mithraism.
All right.
But this is, of course, one of the big challenges with Mithraism. With Eleusis, we have the famous Homeric hymn to Demeter, which tells us the story of Persephone, right? And lays out what's likely the basis of the religious narrative there. With Mithras, there's no text. Mm-hmm. And so all we're left with are these kind of teasing frescoes and relief sculptures, freestanding sculptures that seem to kind of tell a tale, but what exactly is going on there, we simply don't know.
And there are some terracotta figurines, I think, as well.
Yeah, there's a bunch of this kind of stuff, but how it all fits together, we don't really know.
Okay, so what about the tauroctony?
Yes, so I think if I had to pick any of these themes that show up in the art and iconography as the most important, as the most central to Mithraism, it's the tauroctony, the slaying of the bull.
So we've got two Greek words jammed together there, right? A portmanteau, you might say. Tauros and kteno, to kill.
Yes.
So a bull slaughter lies at the center of this religion in some way, or at least that's the most prominent theory.
Right. And we'll put a number of these pictures in the show notes.
Are we still doing show notes?
We need to kind of catch up on some things, but for this one, I think it's essential.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I can just digress, the popularity of the podcast recently, people are really getting on board. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Episode 1, more than 1,000 downloads so far.
Yeah.
And so we've fallen behind in the show notes, I think, just because out of a sense of shock at the kind of success we're having.
Right. Yeah.
And shock and gratitude. Let me mention that.
Yes. Again, big thanks to the listener.
It's incredible. But back to the bull slaughter.
Yeah. This scene, this type scene shows up again and again and again. And they're usually very similar. We see Mithras, who is depicted as kind of a beardless young man.
Mm-hmm. Maybe 15, 16 years old at most.
Often reminds me of kind of a sculptures of kind of a young Alexander the Great. But he's got this little kind of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs cap on.
It's called a Phrygian cap, isn't it?
And it marks him as an Easterner.
Correct.
Right?
He's from somewhere in, northeast Turkey?
Would that be Phrygia?
Yeah, northeast Asia Minor, just south of the Black Sea and a little bit to the east, not all the way to the Persians, but not in Greek territory either.
Right. It would mark him kind of, again, over the hill in the east, exotic. So in the scene, Mithras has his knee on the back of the bull. With his left hand, he's pulling back the head of the bull so as to expose its neck, its throat.
He's got his fingers in the animal's mouth.
Yes.
Gripping the front teeth and pulling back with some force.
Right.
I'm enacting it pantomime here in the vomitorium.
Yes, you are. And it's an excellent pantomime.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. And what's also kind of striking is that he's often looking away. He's turning his head away, either like towards the viewer or deliberately not looking at what he's doing.
Is it that he's dispassionate, or he doesn't want to see the slaughter he's about to enact?
Well, I think that's it. I think it's
the latter.
I think it's that the bull. We're seeing kind of a dealing with death here, and so you don't look death in the face.
In the snout, in this instance.
Right. It's apotropaic. He's turned away from it. And then with his right hand, he's plunging a dagger into the back or the neck of the bull. And then some really interesting details. So where he stabs the bull, there's a stream of blood, of course, that comes out. And then these other creatures come up to join the scene. There's a dog that runs up to lap at the blood. There's usually a snake slithering up near the dog to lap at the blood. And then just for good measure, there's a scorpion who has attached itself to the testicles of the bull.
Oh, this is a little disturbing.
It is a little disturbing. And most of these scenes of the tauroctony have all or most of these elements. And so the question is, what does it mean? What does it mean? And I guess at the end of the day, we don't really know. But the going theory is that this is the central scene. So if it's a mystery cult centered around death and resurrection, this must be the central moment of dealing with death.
And the animal is slaughtered in place of the individual? It's a vicarious atonement?
Something like that, possibly. I mean, there's some evidence that for the Persians, the bull was associated with the moon, which is often associated with death.
Because of the eclipse and the fact that it seems to be eaten away each month and then restored.
Right, exactly.
It goes through waxing and waning.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not done. It gets gibbous.
So if the bull is a symbol of death, the Mithras himself is associated with the sun, which is associated with life. The sun too kind of dies and resurrects every day as it rises and sets.
Seems a little simplistic.
Well, I think it's persuasive in that it's reflective of the core aspect of a mystery cult.
Fair.
There's clearly, I think, more going on here.
But the particulars, this is not a cult you want to die on.
Exactly. Right. This is not a cult you want to die on.
That's a nasty look, Winkle. Come on.
How do you explain the dog, the snake, and the
the
scorpion?
It's not my responsibility.
Oh, well, let me offer something.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, again, this being a cult that has kind of a Persian sheen, if I can use that phrase again. One of the many things the Persians were famous for was their astronomy, their astrology. So Taurus, the bull, Canis, the dog, Serpens, the serpent, Scorpio. These are constellations known to the Greco-Roman world.
Yeah, the zodiac.
And so many people say, well, that's what's going on here. And so the bull represents Taurus. And again, there's some evidence that the time of year in which Taurus was prominent in the sky in Rome, in this area of the world, was the time of kind of the descent into fall. And so the bull again represents that the season of death is coming. And so the sun god, Mithras, comes in and slays the bull. So you have that death-conquering motif.
I got it.
And so that it expresses this central mystery.
I'll buy it.
Right? So just as Persephone gets past death every year, Taurus the bull coming back every season, he comes around, slaughters the bull, deals with death.
Got it. So winter gives way to spring.
Right.
And there's some blood expiation, perhaps, as well, and Shirley Jackson.
Shirley Jackson. Do you know Shirley Jackson?
I do not. I thought he played shortstop for the Cardinals.
Shirley Jackson?
It's not an exclusively woman's name.
Well, I suppose not. But you're thinking Ozzie Smith played shortstop for the
He did.
for the
That's
Cardinals.
true.
Right. But Shirley Jackson wrote this wonderful short story called The Lottery. This really creepy lottery takes place in kind of present day, but it's if you draw the slip of paper with the black dot on it, you are stoned by the community.
So it's a literary version of the Hunger Games.
Kind of, yes. Though much better in my.
That's why I said literary version, because I didn't think that the Hunger Games
were very literary.
I didn't read them, but based on what people tell me.
Okay. All right. Well, you should read them before you make such a snarky judgment.
No.
Oh.
Snark all I want.
All right. So in that short story, someone from the community is killed so that the crops can grow. Right? So that the angry god has to be appeased. So there, some have suggested that Mithras also functioned in this way. There's again, you can see this in the show notes, that one of these relief sculptures shows Mithras slaying the bull, and he seems to be kind of under a vault. He seems to be kind of underground, perhaps, and then above him you see these plants, trees, crops growing. And so the slaughter of the bull is associated with crops are growing. If you want a proper harvest that's going to feed the community, then death has to be dealt with. And so maybe there was some element of that to the cult. But it's hard to say.
So, Jeff, I understand we have one final scene to describe before we go on a mini travelogue.
Right.
So what is this final scene?
So in one of these sculptures, and I believe it's just an example of one, so how much can you extrapolate from it? It shows the bull slaying motif on one panel, and in the next panel, we seem to see Mithras sitting on the carcass of the bull, sharing a meal with the sun god, and kind of passing out pieces to his followers and acolytes there. Again, this is it's confusing because a lot of the language around Mithras makes him synonymous with the sun god. He's called Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. And this panel seems to suggest that he's a separate being. There's not a consistency that we find through this, and that makes it doubly difficult to really kind of nail down a narrative. But in this scene where he's sharing this meal, we do know that in a Mithraeum, these guilds of worshipers, one of the things they would do was share a sacred meal together. And this seems to be prefiguring that. By having a meal together in the Mithraeum, you're doing what Mithras does with the sun god or as the sun god.
So this is analogous to the way that we usually stop off at Five Guys before coming into the vomitorium?
Right, yeah, right. Very sacred.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's get to the mini travelogue as we wind up this episode.
Right. So in Ostia, which is the ancient port of Rome.
Yeah, Ostia Antica.
Yes, where the Tiber meets the sea.
Mm-hmm.
There are 18 of these Mithraea.
That many?
Yes.
I do not remember that.
Yes, it's the highest concentration of any of these things that have been found in an urban area. There are only 7 that have been discovered in Rome, and of course hundreds throughout the ring of the Mediterranean. But Ostia, for whatever reason, seemed to have been very popular in terms of the worship of Mithras.
Interesting. So
in 2016, we went to one of these.
We did, yep. All the way back to episode 1 of Ad Nauseam. We briefly mentioned the Mithraeum and our visit there with the students.
Yeah.
So we reprise a little bit of that episode, but we're going to go deeper this time.
We are.
So when we were there in 2016, it was a mostly overcast day, if memory serves.
I don't remember that part, but that's that's good.
Okay. That it was overcast or that I remember it?
Both.
Well, I think it added to the experience a little ambiance.
Yeah. Okay.
We didn't have to take our own fog machine down into the subterranean chambers because we had that kind of thing in the air.
That's such a pain to have to lug that thing around.
Yeah, so what happened then?
So we went up kind of around the bend and over the hill. It wasn't part of kind of our scheduled tour.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of walk down this hill, and it takes you down into this almost fully extant Mithraeum. It's this underground kind of vault chamber, and with 2 kind of rows of benches along the sides. How long would you say? It's maybe
25, 30 feet?
Yeah.
It's pretty large. You were going to say not too large, but it comfortably fit, 34 students?
Sure.
And 2 middle-aged, somewhat abdominally expanding professors?
Right.
And a talkative guide, whom we won't mention.
Right. But it wasn't like a massive temple.
No.
Right.
No, it's meant for the intimacy of the initiate.
Right.
It's not for spectating. You have to be a part of it.
Right. And it's from the size of these things that we can speculate about, how many people were part of these, these little guilds.
As many as had punch cards.
Exactly. Right. So you arrange yourself on kind of 2 sides of the benches. There's kind of a central aisle. And at the far end, kind of where the cave ends, there's a podium with some kind of depiction of Mithras on it. Usually Mithras engaged in the bull slaying motif. And it's in these chambers where these secret rituals took place. Again, this is really where our knowledge ends. We know that there was a sacred meal. Some texts talk about a kista mystica, kind of a secret box, where some kind of object was revealed.
Right.
Yeah.
And above the representation of the tauroctony, this sculpture figure, there's an aperture, which is a fancy word for hole.
Yes.
There's an aperture in the vault so that the sunlight can stream down through there and give it another kind of what's the word I'm looking for? What's that Indian string instrument?
Sitar.
Yeah. Can give it kind of the sitar sense, right, of mystery and exoticnesses.
Right. Many of these Mithraea have that opening at the top. Some seem to have been kind of fully enclosed, and there, again, you would have to have like lamplight or torchlight in there, which also would make it very sitar-y. Yeah. So what happened in there? That was the encounter with the god. That's where the mystery took place. One interpretation of this that I like is that why an underground chamber? And I think my sense is that you're following Mithras down into the tomb. The cave is kind of as a burial chamber, and where else to meet death than beneath the ground?
Right. It's like the Necromantian.
Yeah, exactly.
That we visited in Epirus.
Yeah.
In 2011.
Right.
You go down into the underworld, you come back up, you have your own convenient franchised catabasis.
Yes, it gives you that whole enacting of the myth. You are enacting your own death and resurrection just by the physical act of going below and coming back out.
Right. And then the Roman soldiers would glance at their watches and say, "Hey, you want to get a sandwich?"
Is that what they'd say? Right after the meal? They're going out for a sandwich?
Soldiering is a hungry business.
That's true. All right, so that's really the core aspect of it. And it's frustrating to the degree of what we don't know. But, I mean, to my mind, that just makes it all the more interesting. Now, we know that there was likely many other aspects to Mithras worship. We know from another Mithraeum in Ostia, there seems to have been grades of initiation. Like the Masons.
Like CrossFit.
Like CrossFit? There are levels of CrossFit?
Yes, part
of shape I am.
We're both on the starter level, but yeah, part of the way that it's marketed, and brilliantly, as I understand, is that as you advance through the system, you get promoted in levels of fitness. I don't know the names of all of them. Stairmaster is maybe one of them, but yes, it's like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was going to mention like the Masons. Not as fascinating as the CrossFit.
Well, or the Stonecutters.
The Stonecutters, yeah, right, from The Simpsons.
From The Simpsons, yes. Starring Patrick Stewart.
That was man. You have an encyclopedic knowledge when it comes.
He was in that episode.
Yeah. So you could go through different degrees, and there's a Mithraeum, the Mithraeum of Felicissimus, that has these different symbols on the floor in that central aisle, which suggests the different starter levels.
Where they would stand according to rank. Is that it?
We don't know.
Was it for Twister?
That's some kind of mystery twister. Now that's a bold theory.
There was Koroks.
There was Koroks. There was the Koroks, the raven. There was Nymphis, the bridegroom.
Yeah, Leo,
the lion. Paris, the Persian. My personal favorite, the Heliodromus, the sun runner.
The sun runner.
Yeah. And then at the top was the Pater, the father, which was the highest rank.
Okay.
And we don't know much about what this meant, but again, it suggests that there were other levels of initiation that we could proceed through the cult.
So after the tauroctony, right, they would call out Koroks, left foot red.
I love it.
Is that pretty much what happened?
I love it. It's just a party game.
Okay.
Yep. And then there are these other depictions of Mithras where he's popping out of a little egg and he's coming up out of a rock.
Of course.
And so there seems to be some suggestion that he was also understood some kind of primeval being that was there at the beginning of the world, born into the universe along with what's called the cosmic egg. He comes up out of the very stuff of...
This is getting trippy now.
It is getting trippy. The stuff, the soil, the rock of the earth itself. He's kind of a Roman Persian Adam. He's kind of a primeval being. He's there at the start of things, and so he has knowledge of all these things. There's also this idea that the Mithraeum itself was often arranged according to alignment with planets, north, south, east, west, north pole, and so the Mithraeum is kind of a universe in miniature. So you're in there in a space that represents kind of all of space and time, and you're with the god who was there at the beginning of it, and so he's in control of it. But again, what does all this mean? How do you explain it in any kind of practical manner? You simply can't.
So what stands out to me, Jeff, and what we've talked about today is the breadth of these ideas. There's a certain element of specificity in the imagery of the tauroctony and the scorpion and the dog and so forth.
Yeah.
And yet so much of it remains beyond our ken. What can we possibly know?
Yeah.
And I suppose that really encapsulates what a mystery is.
Right. But at the same time, as I often say to my myth students, or even in the world religions class that I teach, this central story of death and resurrection, facing death and getting beyond it, it's the story with a capitalized, italicized the. It's at the center of so many different things. It's at the heart of so many of the films we see, the stories we read, the religious narratives that we read. And this is just another part of that much bigger story.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would just like to say that I am not a syncretist, right? Syncretism, the inappropriate combining of different religions and philosophies based on a superficial resemblance.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I'm not at all surprised that Mithraism would have death and resurrection as its central theme.
Yeah. Yeah. Nor do I. All right, Dave, we got to get out of here. But before we do, tell us about the Moss method.
Well, Jeff, I have some exciting news.
You do?
Yes, and that is we are running a summer sale.
Oh, tell us about it.
Well, listener, you can spend your summer relaxing on your front porch with a glass of lemonade kicked back in your rocking chair, playing jarts or something like that. Or you might want to get out of the rocking chair before you do that. Or you can devote yourself to the study of Greek. And we are running a 10% sale, 10% off Moss Method Module 1. These are 40 lessons that I have handcrafted artisanally. Is that the term?
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. And prepared just for you. So 40 lessons. These are video lessons that you download from YouTube or you watch on YouTube. And I take you from neophyte, so you know nothing about Greek at the beginning, to erudite. Let's say you have a little bit of knowledge of Greek already. Maybe you've learned the alphabet, some other things, you studied in seminary, or you are you're a homeschool student, classical Christian school, and you want to just make a start. Maybe you're a grad student. All kinds of students are taking this course. We start out with the basics, and then I develop this great foundation to take you to the more advanced elements.
Where would they go to find this?
Well, they would go to mossmethod.com, MOSS method.com. Take advantage of our 10% off summer sale beginning tomorrow, June 16, mossmethod.com. You want to study Greek this summer, and you want to do so with me.
Sounds great. All right, we got to go. So we thanks, as always, to our engineer, Mishka.
Yeah, intrepid sound engineer puts this all together. Yes.
Yep. And who else we got to thank?
We need to thank Ken Tamplin and Scott Van Zen, who put together the wonderful music that accompanies the show.
Makes us sound really professional.
Yes, they do, indeed. We want to invite you, listener, to send us email to jeff@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V, or dave@adnauseam.com. We can give you a shout out. You can tell us what you like about the show, what you hate. You can check out our merch, leave a little tip underneath the wine glass, as we say. Show the world that you're taking in and keeping down the classics. And what do we have on tap for next week?
So next week we're going to tackle the book of Acts chapter 14, where we see this really interesting intersection between the pagan world and the Christian world, where Paul and Barnabas are mistaken for Zeus and Hermes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or Hermes and Zeus, actually.
Hermes and Zeus.
Yeah,
right.
as the text points out.
Right. Paul's the chatty one.
Yeah,
right? So
he must be Hermes, and Barnabas is the jovial, hospitable one who's kind of quiet, so he's got to be Zeus. So we're going to take a real close look at that, the text there of Acts 14, and draw out some of its implications.
It's going to be great. But Dave, you got our gustatory party shot today, don't you?
I do, and this is from a woman named Florence Fabricant. I don't know who she is. I love her name. It's alliterative. It's got these nice sounds, Florence Fabricant.
Yeah, that is nice.
And she says, peanut butter is the pâté of childhood.
So true. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.